Well, welcome here to the news at 4. It is a cloudy day in Portland today, but things could lighten up this weekend. Matt Savino will have more in about 10 minutes. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on this Friday.
Here's what's happening. After a deadly heat wave hit the Pacific Northwest last summer, new legislation aims to better protect workers and vulnerable people in excessively hot temperatures.
The latest data from health officials shows a decline in COVID cases in both Oregon and Washington. But the upcoming expiration date on Oregon's mask mandate is a pressing question for OHA.
Teachers in Portland want to shift the momentum in the classroom, pushing for a day where students can take time for some self-care. We start, though, with some big news out of Portland City Hall. Mayor Ted Wheeler has signed an emergency declaration that prohibits camping along busy streets and highways. Our Mike Benner joins us live with more. Mike.
Well, I can tell you this emergency declaration goes into effect immediately, but the mayor says these camps will not be cleared out overnight. This could take months, but he says something had to be done. During a virtual press conference just a few hours ago, Mayor Ted Wheeler announced this emergency declaration that basically bans camping in high crash corridors, and that includes state freeways and highways. This is in direct response to a Vision Zero traffic crash report released by the Portland Bureau of Transportation earlier this week. In that report, we learned that of the 63 people killed on Portland streets last year, more than 1/3 of them were from the houseless community. Mayor Wheeler says that is unacceptable.
Our most vulnerable Portlanders are disproportionately affected by traffic-related injuries and death. These are devastating losses of life.
All right, so this begs the question, where will the people swept out of these camps go? The mayor says somewhere safer, adding that there are some shelter beds available, and he's working with the county to identify another 100 beds. He's even pitched the governor on the idea of thousands of more beds. One more thing worth mentioning, there's a little bit of confusion about who knew about this emergency declaration and when. We know that the Oregon Department of Transportation was consulted by the mayor's office, but the Portland Bureau of Transportation was not. In fact, just this morning, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty, who oversees PBOT, told me she knew nothing about the emergency declaration. The mayor's chief of staff fired back, saying that's just not true. All commissioners were alerted to this just yesterday. Back to you.
Mike, thank you.
Washington Governor Jay Inslee is also backing a plan to move people who are homeless away from dangerous roads and get them the help they need. The state believes more than 17,000 people line major roadways in the state. A new Washington bill wouldn't clear camps. Rather, they'd require an action plan to get people in a safer space.
So we need, the people in the state need to see action this year in our communities. We know that a moral society is one that helps those most in need, and we are not meeting that need at the moment. It is a moral choice and a right choice to transition people out of these encampments, and we have come to accept this as too commonplace.
So right now, lawmakers are working on matching the bill with its budgetary impact. Governor Inslee says the state has $300 million to secure housing for people, and that would be combined with a $40 million proposal to get people off the streets and into shelters.
We go now to Salem. In the wake of last year's deadly heat wave, lawmakers say it is clear that vulnerable Oregonians need help grappling with our climate crisis. As our Maggie Vespa reports, they're proposing a pair of bills aimed at guaranteeing access to air conditioning.
I think these were preventable deaths.
Preventable deaths is how State Senator Casey Jama describes the close to 100 Oregonians lost last summer. Officials say they died amid June's record-breaking heat wave. Most were found in their homes without access to air conditioning.
What do we want? More death?
That was the case for Linda Aiken's neighbor. She spoke to us days after the heat wave.
And it was an agonizing, horrible way to die.
Fast forward more than 6 months, the short session is underway in Salem, and lawmakers can't forget the loss.
Anytime that any of us, we lost one of our community members in preventable deaths, is really heartbreaking.
So they're proposing a pair of bills. House Bill 4058 would direct the Oregon Health Authority to immediately buy and distribute air conditioners to people in need. It would also create a longer-term program to help people install heat pumps in their homes. Those provide heating and cooling. Then there's Senate Bill 1536. This bill would largely prohibit landlords from banning air conditioners in leases. Under this bill, they would have to allow window-mounted AC units as long as those units fit a list of criteria. Their installation can't, for instance, damage the building. That was a big issue during the heat wave. Even as temps soared into the triple digits, tenants told us they were threatened with fines if they installed window-mounted units.
It was 96.
It got up to 96 in here.
Yes.
What did that feel like?
Horrible.
At public hearings this week, groups representing landlords have been weighing in, suggesting amendments, but largely offering support for the bill's goals. Lawmakers say measures like this are the new norm, a growing focus on mitigating the worst impacts of the climate crisis.
I am somebody who always has resisted the idea of adapting to climate change, thinking that we should be changing the indicators that are creating this on the ground. We still need to do that work. But the fact is, what we see now is that people have to have support in order to coexist with these changing conditions.
And both bills have bipartisan support, we're told, and they seem poised to pass. The short session, by the way, lasts a month, and lawmakers are considering a long list of budget items. And it's worth noting, with federal COVID aid, they have a lot of money to throw around, up to $2 billion. Guys.
All right, Maggie, thank you. There's some hopeful news coming from the latest COVID data. It shows cases are heading down in most parts of Oregon and Washington, and that should bring some relief to our hospitals. Tim Gordon joins us, and Tim, there is a new COVID forecast for the state of Oregon.
Yeah, there is, Brittany. It comes from the expert analysts at OHSU, and it has hospitalizations in Oregon peaking this weekend.
Finally, a light at the end of the Omicron tunnel. The highly transmissible variant is showing signs of waning, says OHSU's Peter Graven.
It's going to bounce around a little bit, probably for this week and maybe into next. But I do expect a decline. I'm not seeing additional surges. I'm not seeing any increases in cases in particular to worry about there.
The encouraging news is important for hospitals, seriously strained but not broken. As of Thursday, Oregon had 1,087 people in the hospital with COVID. And Graven says the peak is here, but that does not mean things immediately get better.
We still have very high case counts, and that's reality. Even on the way down, you can infect just as many people as you did on the way up.
Still, Graven says Oregon, which is the blue line here, is doing better than most of the country, where the hospitalization peak was more than a third higher on average.
And a big part of that actually has to do with the actions people took. Our masking rate is high compared to many other states that tried to kind of rapidly catch up. Also, we took behaviors when other states were getting hit and didn't wait for it to hit here.
After this weekend, the forecast's red line shows we should see a continued decline in Oregon's COVID hospitalizations, falling to pre-Omicron levels by the end of March, then down from there.
We're hopeful that we are seeing the start of that downward trend.
Jonathan Modi speaks for OHA's Public Health Division. We talked to him about how the forecast plays into deciding on continuing mask requirements for indoor public places. A decision must be made by the end of next Tuesday when a temporary mask rule expires. Modi says, based on where we are now, some type of replacement rule is likely.
So, changes could be made. It could be, basically the temporary rule as we came to know it. There could be adjustments in the language.
And so a new mask rule is likely, and when it comes down, it will be called a permanent rule, but just like the one that was put in place for schools, that does not mean it will last forever. Health officials can end it when they think it's safe to do so. Ashley?
All right, Tim, thank you. Well, Oregon is sending now at-home COVID tests to community organizations and health providers. The state had initially ordered 6 million test kits at the beginning of the year. The boxes you see here are filled with about 90 test kits each. In Oregon, those kits are going to specific people and places, including shelters and first responders. For several underserved communities in our area, access to testing is a game changer.
People have been ringing our doorbell nonstop every day. So we've been hearing the community loud and clear. So we're grateful for this opportunity to help close that equity gap for families that haven't been able to access due to income, due to having a multi-generational family. So there's just not enough tests to go around.
As of yesterday afternoon, Washington County's health department had distributed about 5,000 test kits. The first round of tests in Multnomah and Clackamas counties are going out this week. Well, the state of Washington is sending COVID tests directly to people's homes. It has an online portal where you can order up to 5 kits. However, right now they're out of stock. The state expects to get more tests next week. For updates, you can check sayyescovidhometest.org.
We have heard it over and over again from educators who say students have more needs than ever this year. Well, this week, teachers in Portland got a day to focus on how to help their students. Christine Pitawanich joins us. And Christine, educators they had what they're calling a school climate day.
Right. Brittany, Portland teachers tell me school climate days usually take place at the beginning of the school year, right before school starts, and they're meant to help teachers familiarize themselves with supports for students and how to get those supports to students if the need arises. Really, all this to promote a better school climate. The district says they touched on it at the very beginning of the year, but as for a day specifically focusing on school climate, well, that didn't happen until this week. They say it was a time for collaboration, promoting a sense of belonging and connectedness amongst students and staff.
We want to break down the sense of isolation that teachers can sometimes feel. And so here's a space where you can really see the collective action. Like, here are our common agreements. Here are the things we're going to do to support students. Here's how to access it. And we're doing this work together.
So having this school climate day is something teachers had been asking for before winter break even, especially with fights at school that we heard about and student outbursts in the classroom. And educators have told us over and over again that the students that they're seeing this year have more need than ever before in terms of managing their emotions and relationships with others.
So Christine, it really does sound like those educators got the school climate day that they wanted, but I mean, let's be real here. Is one day enough to address all of this need?
Yeah, probably not. The school climate specialist that I spoke to says, trying to develop that skill where you're able to talk to a child, talk to a student about their emotions, especially in a charged situation. Well, that takes practice and developing that skill over time. But teachers tell me that what continues to contribute to a lot of the issues that they're seeing in school has to do with substitute shortages. That's because you've got school psychologists and counselors who step out of their typical roles and into the substitute role, which means that they're no longer able to do as good of a job maybe, or at least as focused of a job as they would be otherwise in terms of providing more supports to students.
So many compounding factors. All right. Thanks so much, Christine.